I'm Nadia Jani and you're watching A News. Now let's take a look at today's top stories. Britain's King Charles stripped his brother Andrew of royal titles and mansion. Russia targets Ukrainian energy sites in a new wave of strikes, President Zelensky says. And Afghanistan and Pakistan agree on the continuation of a ceasefire after talks in Istanbul. Good evening. We start with a royal scandal. Britain's King Charles has stripped his brother Andrew of all remaining royal titles, including the designation of Prince. The decision follows years of controversy over Andrew's ties with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
A family scandal turns into royal exile.
So what do you think about
King Charles has stripped his brother Andrew of every royal honour. Andrew will no longer use the title His Royal Highness or the designation of Prince in any official capacity. He will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and will also leave his royal residence at the Royal Lodge. The decision, announced by Buckingham Palace, follows renewed pressure over Andrew's long-standing association with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The move has drawn a mixed response across Britain, but many Londoners largely welcomed the decision of Britain's King Charles.
He's representing the country and he's meant to be the face of England. Is this what we represent? Is this what the people represent? No, it's a disgrace. So I'm happy he's got stripped of his titles, his royal titles as well. He should be kicked out of the country because these guys live off us. We're the working class, we're the people in charge, basically.
I think it's fair. I also think that they should release the list. I also think that anyone who does quote-unquote unbecoming things deserves that kind of treatment, yeah.
It is not the first scandal of Andrew. His late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, stripped him of his patronages and military associations in 2022, making him a royal persona non grata. The decision occurred after the settlement of sex abuse lawsuit filed against him by Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who died by suicide in Australia earlier this year. Since then, the 65-year-old has only made public appearances at family events.
The US signed a 10-year defense framework with India on Friday, which included information sharing and technology cooperation between the two nations. The pact was concluded during a meeting in Kuala Lumpur between US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth and his Indian counterpart.
New 10-year defense framework, which we signed, is ambitious. It's a significant step for our two militaries, a roadmap for deeper and even more meaningful collaboration ahead. It underscores America's long-term commitment to our shared security and our strong partnership between our countries. We have a major defense partnership that is ongoing and made even more powerful by this agreement. So, sir, thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Today, on the sidelines of the ASEAN Defence Ministers Meeting Plus, I am very happy to put a face to that voice. We will keep meeting. This occasion, we are signing the defence framework for 10 years, which I'm sure will open new doors for our defence relationship. Thank you so much. And also under your leadership, we will be able to do more bilaterally on the defence sector.
Moving now to Europe, and Polish fighter jets have intercepted a Russian reconnaissance plane over the Baltic Sea on Thursday, the second such incident this week. Poland's defense minister confirmed that aircrafts were scrambled after detecting the Russian plane flying in international airspace. The Polish Army Operational Command later described the incident and published multiple photos of the intercepted plane. Over in Ukraine, Russia launched an overnight attack on the city of Sumy on Friday, injuring 11 people, including 4 children. The strikes damaged homes and a railway depot. President Zelensky condemned the attacks and called for a stronger international response.
The strike was complex, a combined, deliberately calculated one, designed to make it difficult to counter. There were missiles, including ballistic ones, and air-launched ballistic types. In total, 52 missiles and more than 600 strike drones were launched, around 400 of them Shaheeds. Most of the drones were neutralized, and 2/3 of the missiles were also shot down. This is outright terror. Normal countries don't wage war like this, and the world must respond appropriately to such Russian warfare.
On the other hand, Russia claims that Ukraine carried out drone strikes on a power plant in the western city of Oryol, saying it damaged a heat pipeline, forcing authorities to restrict heating and hot water supplies. The incident comes in the middle of a surge in cross-border attacks on energy infrastructure as both sides intensify pressure with peace talks at a standstill. Hamas has returned the bodies of 2 deceased Israeli hostages on Thursday in the first handover of new bodies in 9 days. Blake Sifton reports from Tel Aviv for A News.
Hamas returned the bodies of 2 deceased hostages to Israel on Thursday. Both were Israeli hostages who were taken from their communities near the Gaza border on October 7th and died in captivity. The return is the first time in 9 days that Hamas has returned hostage bodies. In exchange, the Israeli government returned 30 Palestinian bodies to Gaza on Friday. Now, with this return, 11 hostage bodies still remain in Gaza. That's of the 28 that were in Gaza at the time the ceasefire came into effect. The Israeli government says that Hamas knows where the majority of the hostage bodies are, and they have accused the group of violating the ceasefire by purposely delaying the return of the hostage bodies. Along with an attack on Israeli soldiers in Rafah, the slow pace of the return of the hostage bodies was part of the Israeli military's justification, the Israeli government's justification for a wave of airstrikes they carried out in Gaza on Tuesday and Wednesday. Local health officials say over 100 Palestinians were killed in those airstrikes. Now, Hamas says that they are doing everything they can to return the bodies quickly. They say they are buried under rubble and it will take time and heavy machinery to find them. In recent days, international teams from Egypt as well as the Red Cross have joined the search for bodies in Gaza. And there are reports that a Turkish team, an 80-strong Turkish team that are expert in recovering bodies from earthquakes, are standing by near Gaza to enter and to assist in the search, but they are still waiting for approval from Israeli authorities. Now, meanwhile, the umbrella group that represents the family members of the hostages held in Gaza, they have criticized the Israeli government for failing to explain why it is taking so long to return the bodies, and they have demanded an urgent meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Blake Sifton for A News in Tel Aviv.
Now, the Chinese President Xi Jinping attended the first session of the 32nd APEC Economic Leaders Meeting in South Korea. In his address, he outlined a 5-point proposal of advance inclusive, universally beneficial economic globalization and strengthen the Asia-Pacific community. Xi is scheduled to meet Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney on the sidelines on the summit. The United Nations has raised concerns over US President Donald Trump's order to resume nuclear weapons testing. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said nuclear testing should never be permitted under any circumstances. US Vice President J.D. Vance defended the decision, calling it an important step toward ensuring national security.
We have a big arsenal, obviously. The Russians have a large nuclear arsenal. The Chinese have a large nuclear arsenal. Sometimes you've got to test it to make sure that it's functioning and working properly. We've been working very closely, even with nations that we don't have the best relations with, to try to limit nuclear proliferation. The president's going to keep on working on that, but it's an important part of American national security to make sure that this nuclear arsenal we have actually functions properly, and that's part of a testing regime. To be clear, we know that it does work properly, but you got to keep on top of it over time, and the president just wants to make sure that we do that.
Now to environmental news, and Hurricane Melissa's impact is being felt across the Caribbean, with dozens dead and widespread destruction reported in Jamaica, Cuba and Haiti. Recovery efforts are underway as the storm weakens and moves towards Bermuda.
Hurricane Melissa left a trail of destruction across the northern Caribbean this week, devastating parts of Jamaica, Cuba and Haiti, before weakening over open waters on its way to Bermuda. In Jamaica, hospitals were damaged, power grids collapsed, and thousands were stranded after the Category 5 storm hit the island's southwest. Residents faced blocked roads, stranded communities and long lines for scarce fuel as US rescue teams arrived to assist in recovery efforts, with damages estimated at $22 billion. The confirmed death toll from hurricane climbed to 49 on Thursday after wreaking destruction across much of the northern Caribbean. More than 70% of the island remained without power on Thursday morning. In eastern Cuba, residents in Santiago de Cuba cleared debris and patched roofs after heavy rain and strong winds. Authorities reported significant infrastructure and crop damage, but no fatalities after evacuating more than 700,000 people from vulnerable areas.
We've all finished cleaning up, and now we're going to start organizing the merchandise. After that, we'll open the doors to the public. For electricity, we're using the generator. With that, we've got all the fridges running, and we're cooling everything down so we can resume service.
Meanwhile, in Haiti, at least 25 people were killed and 12 reported missing, most in the coastal town of Petit Goâve, where flooding swept through homes after a river overflowed.
Hurricane Melissa, look what it has done to us. We are victims. We don't know what the situation is like in other areas. We are victims at the La Digue bridge. We couldn't save anything we owned, not even our slippers and shoes. Everything is gone. I survived because I live on a higher hill.
As Melissa weakened to Category 1 late Thursday, forecasters said it would pass northwest of Bermuda. Across the Caribbean, from Kingston to Santiago de Cuba and Petit Goâve, recovery was just beginning amid destroyed homes and widespread damage.
Protests have erupted across Tanzania following a highly disputed presidential election. The unrest has spilled over to neighbouring Kenya, where police fired live rounds to disperse crowds.
Violent protests erupted near Namanga, a Kenyan town on the border with Tanzania, as unrest from Tanzania's disputed elections spilled across the border. Demonstrations broke out across Tanzania during Wednesday's vote, with protesters angered by the exclusion of President Samia Suluhu Hassan's two main challengers from the race and what they describe as rising repression of government critics. Police fired stun grenades and live rounds at protesters, who scattered as tear gas filled the streets. Residents voiced frustration over the authorities' response.
The police have been firing tear gas and shooting Kenyans with live bullets. It has been a bad day today.
We have a problem because one of us has been shot, and we do not know why they are shooting at us. When Tanzanians fight us, we Kenyans do not have a problem with them. Why are they shooting at us in our area?
Authorities have imposed an overnight curfew in Dar es Salaam, and internet access remains disrupted across the country.
Welcome back to A News. Now, following the Russian overnight attacks on Ukraine, the UN humanitarian coordinator on Ukraine warned that the conflict feels increasingly like a protracted war, with all hopes of a swift resolution fading away. Speaking in Geneva, the UN Assistant Secretary General Matthias Schmal also warned that this year has been deadlier than 2024 in terms of civilian casualties, with a 30% increase year on year. Joining me now from New York to discuss this in more detail is John Kavalik. Good afternoon and good morning.
Thank you.
My first question is, in regards to these attacks, does it highlight Trump's lack of progress to end the war in Ukraine?
It does, but it also reflects everyone's lack of ability to end the war in Ukraine, particularly the Ukrainians and the Russians. The United Nations is always always delivers great presence of understatement when it talks about that we're now into the fourth year, and they're opining that there may not be a swift end to the war. Sometimes it's tragic, but it gets to be comical. We are. I think we're expecting that 2026 is now the consensus for either a permanent ceasefire, but not necessarily peace. And we'll see what trajectory that may blow through.
And last week, the US sanctioned two of Russia's biggest oil providers. However, this doesn't seem to have deterred Moscow from its war efforts. What do you think Putin's plan is?
It's a little too early to evaluate the impact of US sanctions because, one, they didn't go into effect immediately. And then you also have that political lag, which is they get announced with great fanfare, and they're basically targeting two governments: government of India, Prime Minister Modi, the government of China, President Xi. And so it's just like when oil prices or when oil production decreases or increases into the marketplace, the prices immediately change, but the actual impact takes a while. And so in this particular case, very strong, to use President Trump's favorite word, strong decision to implement or to announce these sanctions. But like every sanction that every country in the world imposes upon another, or the European Union as a group, it depends on the enforcement. And the sanctions won't mean much if the governments of India and China are given carve-outs, if companies in India and China are given carve-outs, if there's not an aggressive amount of enforcement. And that we're waiting to see just what President Trump wants to do.
Yes, and even with that, obviously, we are still seeing quite recent attacks, both from Ukraine on Russia and Russia on Ukraine. And there was a lot of talk. It had been cancelled, the Budapest summit, that was cancelled by Trump. But recently, the Financial Times reported that it was due to a memo from Putin to President Donald Trump, which said in it that it wanted to include territorial concessions, a steep reduction of Ukraine's armed forces, and guarantees that it will never join NATO. What does this tell us about Putin in regards to this particular memo to President Donald Trump?
He's consistent because he's been saying that since 2014. And he's got a great computer and a good photocopier because he just keeps reciting the same demands. But those aren't shocking. And for President Trump, for Secretary Rubio to hear that from Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Lavrov, for President Trump to hear it directly from President Putin, that isn't a great deterrent because President Trump always looks at people come in with their maximalist demands. And then that's what negotiations are. You want all of this. I want all of that. If we know we're not going to get everything we want, but let's bring the list out and let's see where we can merge interests. President Putin, has been fairly consistent. Ukraine has moved closer to President Putin's. Actually, Ukraine, the European Union, NATO, and the U.S. have moved more toward Russian demands than has Russia moved toward everyone else's demands.
Well, we now know obviously how Trump responded to that particular memo and cancelling the meeting, but where do we go from here? Is there room for further negotiations now that we know what Putin is consistently demanding for?
Oh, absolutely. Negotiations are going on every day. It's just negotiations in the 21st century aren't what people are used to seeing from, let's say, World War II, where people are on each side of a table in a room. Now there are so many communication channels that can be used. There's so many levels of discussion, and there's so many individuals that are a part of the process. So messaging, even when you will hear two presidents say, as for one example, President Trump, he was in the room twice in Malaysia and in South Korea with Prime Minister Carney, who he has some issues with. And he said, I'm not talking to him. But the governments are still talking. And so that's what we have happening here. Negotiations continue, and we still have some direct exchanges between Russia and Ukraine, whether it be prisoners of war, whether it be children, whether it be wounded. So there is an existing contour that hasn't been disrupted. But do we have Trump, Putin, Zelensky sitting at a round table? Not yet, but through surrogates, they still are, and that's that's a good thing. And right now, that's about as much as we're going to see for a while.
Yes, and Zelensky has been very firm about not handing over its Ukraine's sovereign territory. Do you think the next step for Ukraine could be to get the long-range missiles it has been requesting from the US in order to combat Russia's aggression?
Well, President Zelensky has shifted in terms of land. From, in 2022, it was, we're not giving up an inch. We want them out of the internationally recognized territory of Ukraine, including Crimea. Over time, that shifted to President Zelensky having to do two things. One, personally accept that it's unlikely Russia's going to leave much or anything of what it's got. And secondly, to prepare his population for the fact that it's likely we're not going to get some of these territories back. Where President Zelensky and NATO, the European Union, and even the US sort of drawing a line is where Russia controls 70-80% of certain oblasts, certain provinces, and then Russians saying, well, we want all of them. And President Zelensky, wait a minute, we're not giving you 30% of something that you don't even control. So now we're getting into, well, how do you deal with that? Well, maybe you move the boundaries and you just push the boundaries west, and so then Russia has 100% of what it controls, but the rest remains in Ukraine. So that's a discussion. In terms of the missiles, Ukraine has a challenge because at the same time they're asking for missiles and rockets that will go further from third parties. They are developing their own, which then lessens the pressure on the US, NATO, EU, etc., to give to Ukraine, because one of the challenges has always been, we don't want a proxy war. We don't want German missiles hitting Russia, UK missiles hitting Russia, US missiles hitting Russia. But the reality is we do have German missiles hitting Russia. We do have UK Storm Shadows hitting into Russia. And now we've got Ukrainian missiles and drones hitting into Russia. So there's less pressure. They want Tomahawks, but there's less pressure on the US to do it. What Ukraine really wants and needs more of is intelligence sharing so that the US and NATO will help them target as deeply into Russia as possible. And then two, allow for whatever is given to Ukraine, whatever Ukraine buys, that they can do with what they want. And thus far, they're doing quite a bit. They've impacted substantially the production and the processing of energy in Russia. It has forced the Russians to recalibrate, but Russia's still a much bigger country, and so they can absorb more of this pain. And because of the structure of the Russian government, it can force their people to accept more pain without a lot of outlets for them to raise their hand and say, enough's enough.
Well, that's very detailed as to obviously where they're making their own missiles in order to lessen that pressure from other partners that are supporting Ukraine. I just want to quickly move to what we now know about Poland, who intercepted a Russian plane that flew into its airspace on Thursday. And it just brings the wider question of what is NATO's position on this, as we're seeing this happening more? And is Russia pushing its luck? Obviously, we know that it's targeting Ukraine, but also other nations, other countries nearby.
You know, it's important to know that the aircraft that was which you showed, these are propeller planes. They go slowly. Certainly, you can put a missile, a projectile, a bomb into any of these planes. So they can be offensive as much as defensive, but they're not. They're not jet fighters in that where NATO is launching F-16s and F-35s and Eurofighters to go up and have dogfights. The Russians are, testing. They're probing. More of it is annoying, and they know that as long as they stay within the generally accepted rules of engagement, NATO flying over Russian territory or near Russian territory, particularly Black Sea, and Russia doing the same in the Baltics and in international waters. Both sides are careful to try not to escalate, but they also have a performative process, which is NATO needs to show that it works. They need to be able to show that they can launch jet aircraft quickly and respond and shadow what the Russians are doing. But unless the Russians do something, we're not likely going to see a NATO aircraft shooting down a reconnaissance plane from Russia. In terms of the other, whether it's drones or missiles heading into Ukraine that then somehow land in Poland or land in Hungary or land in Slovakia, then we're moving toward where NATO may very well say, we're going to now put up a curtain and we're going to be proactive. So we're going to shoot into Ukraine, or we're going to fly over the western portions of Ukraine, and we're going to try to protect ourselves. But it's a delicate diplomatic military dance. But there's no question that President Putin knows that it annoys everyone, knows that it then raises the speculation, oh my gosh, nuclear weapons and that. So in a very perverse way, he's having a little bit of fun.
Yes, it does seem so. Well, thank you so much for joining me and for your insights, John. Take care. Thank you. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Estonia's Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna is in Turkey for an official visit, holding talks with his Turkish counterpart Hakan Fidan in Ankara. Discussions are focusing on strengthening defence, cooperation, advancing Turkey-EU relations, and addressing regional issues, including the situations in Gaza, Syria, and Ukraine. Both sides are expected to stress the importance of closer political dialogue and joint efforts to ensure regional stability. Georgia's EU candidate status has influenced Armenia's growing turn toward Europe. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says his country was inspired by Georgia's EU candidate status granted in 2023. Our correspondent has more from Georgia.
When Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan said Georgia's EU candidate status inspired Armenia's move to adopt a law on EU accession, he reflected a genuine shift in regional dynamics. Georgia's candidacy granted in late 2023 showed that closer integration with the European Union is achievable even in a region long influenced by Moscow. For Armenia, it offered a model of engagement based on institutional reform and trade access rather than military alignment. Since then, Pashinyan's government has signaled a gradual turn toward Europe, driven in part by frustration over Russia's declining security role. The law adopted by Armenian parliament on launching the country's accession process to the European Union marks the beginning of a measured reorientation from reliance on Moscow toward a Western framework. Azerbaijan, meanwhile, continues a pragmatic course, expanding energy and transport ties with Europe while avoiding the political commitments of deeper integration. For Russia, the trend is clear: continued pressure on Georgia through economic and political levers and growing irritation with Armenia's outreach to the West. Georgia remains cautious but firm in its European aspirations, while Armenia appears increasingly willing to test the similar ground. The South Caucasus is quietly changing. Georgia's EU candidacy not only advanced its own European path, but also reshaped the regional debate, introducing a new balance of influence across the region. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has condemned calls by the US President Donald Trump to resume nuclear weapons testing, calling the move both regressive and irresponsible. Writing on X, he said that the rebranding of the Department of Defense to Department of War was a nuclear-armed bully. Our correspondent Taraj Shiralilu has more.
Iran's top diplomat Abbas Araghchi slammed the United States for deciding to restart testing of nuclear weapons, accusing it as a nuclear-armed country, which proved to be a bully after rebranding its Department of Defense to the Department of War. In a post on his X account, he said that in a blatant violation of international law, the US has been demonizing Iran's peaceful nuclear program and threatening further strikes on Tehran's safeguarded nuclear sites after the 12-day war in June. Araghchi's statement came after US President Donald Trump instructed Pentagon this week to immediately restart testing of nuclear weapons because of advances in other countries' testing programs, making a reference to China and Russia. According to Araghchi, the US announcement on the resumption of nuclear tests is a regressive and irresponsible move and a serious threat to international peace and security. In a rare direct rebuke of President Trump, the UN has warned of a nuclear escalation risk after US chief executive ordered new tests of atomic weapons. Also in Tehran, Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghai, in an interview with Al Jazeera TV, urged Director General of International Atomic Energy Agency Rafael Grossi to avoid unfounded remarks on Iran's civilian nuclear program. In response to Grossi's statement on renewed activities at Iran's nuclear sites, the spokesman reiterated that the tragic statements of the IAEA chief paved the way for the Israeli and US military aggression last June. The IAEA chief has rejected Tehran's criticism that the report by the agency's Board of Governors served as a pretext to bomb Iran's civilian nuclear sites under US safeguards. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, A-News.
In Almaty, defense chiefs from CIS member states have gathered to discuss ways to deepen military cooperation and enhance regional stability in the middle of shifting global security dynamics. Fariza Kalamazana has more.
In Almaty, the Council of Defense Ministers of the CIS member states held a meeting to discuss the development of multilateral military cooperation and measures to strengthen regional stability. Participants noted that amid a changing global order, cooperation within the CIS framework is becoming increasingly relevant. According to representatives of the organization, the architecture of international security is undergoing a period of transformation. Traditional institutions are losing influence, while new centers of power are shaping a multipolar system. In this context, Eurasia is increasingly viewed as one of the key regions where new mechanisms of international cooperation are emerging. Special attention at the meeting was given to the work of joint military systems, from air defense to coordinated responses to chemical, biological and radiological threats. Ministers emphasized the need to modernize these systems and adapt them to evolving challenges. The discussions also covered military training and scientific cooperation in the defense field, including the exchange of best practices between Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan. Also, Kazakhstan signed a military cooperation plan with Russia and Belarus for the upcoming year. At the conclusion of the meeting, the Council of Defense Ministers reaffirmed its commitment to additional joint efforts aimed at strengthening national security across the CIS and maintaining stability throughout the Eurasian region. Fariza Kalimurdina, Almaty, A-News.
Uzbekistan is hosting the 43rd session of the UNESCO General Conference, bringing together representatives from nearly 200 countries. The forum aims to strengthen international dialogue on education, science and culture in the middle of global challenges and rapid technological change.
The conference has opened in the ancient city of Samarkand, marking the first time in 4 decades that UNESCO's main assembly is held outside Paris. More than 2,800 participants from 190 countries have gathered in Uzbekistan, united by shared commitment to preserve cultural and human heritage in the 21st century. President Shavkat Mirziyoyev delivered the opening address, joined by Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić and Slovak President Peter Pellegrini as honorary guests. The Uzbek leader proposed several initiatives, including the School of Artificial Intelligence, a UNESCO Academy for Women's Leadership, and a Green Capital program aimed at combining heritage preservation with innovation and sustainability. The conference also comes as UNESCO faces a period of global turbulence, with the United States planning to withdraw from the organization again by 2026. The forum will determine UNESCO's program and budget for 2027 and elect new leadership. The Samarkand session stands as a symbol of renewal and cooperation, reaffirming the global commitment to safeguard knowledge, culture and shared human values. It is Sevilla Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A-News.
Afghanistan and Pakistan have agreed to extend their fragile ceasefire following a new round of mediated talks in Istanbul. The agreement comes in the middle of deepening humanitarian and economic pressure along the border, now entering its 3rd week of closure. Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
After nearly a week of negotiations in Istanbul, officials from Afghanistan and Pakistan, with mediation from Turkey and Qatar, have agreed to extend the current ceasefire and put in place a joint monitoring mechanism to verify or penalize any violations. The next round of principal-level discussions will be held in Istanbul on November 6th, where the two sides are expected to finalize details of the agreement aimed at keeping tensions under control along the shared border. But on the ground, that peace feels distant. At the border, 5 key crossings remain closed for the 20th day, leaving thousands of people and around 5,000 trucks stranded on both sides. Many of those vehicles are carrying perishable goods like fruit and vegetables, which traders say are now rotting in place. In Islamabad, the Afghan embassy says thousands of refugees are trapped in harsh conditions without food, water or medical care. Officials say around 10,000 people have been detained since the border closures began, and that several, including children and a woman, have lost their lives. The embassy is urging Pakistan to reopen crossings or pause deportations and calling on international aid organizations to intervene. For now, while diplomats celebrate a fragile ceasefire on paper, the real test, as one observer put it, will be whether the agreement brings relief to the people waiting here on the ground. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A-News.
Welcome back to A News. Now turning back to Pakistan and Afghanistan, who have agreed on Thursday to extend a ceasefire during talks in Istanbul after the worst border clashes between the neighbours in years, according to Turkey, which mediated the talks along with Qatar. All parties have agreed to put in place a monitoring and verification mechanism that will enhance and ensure maintenance of peace and impose penalties on the violating party. Here to discuss this in more detail and joining me from Pakistan, I will be speaking to Professor Ashfaq Ahmed, Chairman of the Department of Politics and International Relations at Sargodha University. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
My first question is, the ceasefire has now been further extended. Why is this so significant for both countries?
Okay, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you. As far as this ceasefire is concerned, there are several aspects. For example, if you go back and look into the incident wherein there were attacks inside Afghanistan on the terrorist hideouts, Afghan Taliban, they allege Pakistan of killing civilians, which is called collateral damage. So by this ceasefire, we can avoid collateral damage on both sides. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, because of this particular peace process or ceasefire, the attacks which have been mounted against Pakistan security forces, that can be reduced. So that is one aspect. The second aspect is that you have been mentioning to the monitoring mechanism, which has to be established. So the monitoring mechanism that can be established, and the measures, the verifiable measures to prevent cross-border terrorism in Pakistan, that also can be established. And as far as humanitarian aspect of this conflict is concerned, you would have seen that in your report that there have been trucks stranded on the border on both sides of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And there are refugees which are waiting for the opening of the border so that they can go back to Afghanistan. And your reporter was also telling us that one woman has lost her life. So this is the humanitarian aspect due to which we need this particular ceasefire. And if this ceasefire continue, the environment which is based on mutual mistrust, trust deficit, and security overcome. So if let's suppose that is overcome, then the proxies, both sides allege of one another of using these proxies, that can not be using further. So regional peace and stability also depend on this particular ceasefire agreement between the two countries.
Yes, and obviously the Taliban also said in a statement that they sought good relations with Pakistan based on mutual respect and non-interference. Are things looking like peace between the two nations will be further established with future talks in November?
As far as this claim by Taliban regime is concerned, I would politely disagree with, we have given refuge to Afghan for more than 40 years, and there were more than 44 million Afghan refugees, and they were having their businesses inside Pakistan. But in the past, they were, providing refuge to suicide bombers, and these suicide bombers and terrorists, those who have carried out terrorist activities inside Pakistan, have linkages with the elements in Afghanistan. So that is the issue with mutual respect. And moreover, if you talk about the claim which Taliban has made, this particular element of mutual respect, that is very much visible from the statements which have been issued by Afghan officials. They have been threatening, or they have been issuing provocative statements stating that it is not in the interest of Pakistani government to fight with Afghan Taliban. Why? Because they should ask the cost of the war from NATO and United States of America. So that is the background of the mutual respect. And as far as non-interference is concerned, last year, the attacks which were carried out, they carried out lives of, they took lives of Pakistan security officials. And this year we have sustained more than 650 attacks on Pakistani security forces. And of these 650 attacks, more than 300 had been suicide bombings, and they have cost Pakistani security officials' lives. So they are using proxies and they are interfering inside Pakistan. And as far as the November 6th, dialogues are concerned or negotiations are concerned between the two countries, again, I don't see a positive development because Afghan Taliban, they are not accepting that they are part of the problem and that they are harboring terrorists, the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, which has been designated as a terrorist organization, not only by the United Nations, but the United States of America. So they are providing sanctuaries to TTP, and moreover, the Afghan representative who is present and representing Afghanistan, he lacks the authority. Whenever something has to be decided or determined during the talks, he has to call the authorities in Afghanistan. So I'm not, I'm skeptical of the upcoming dialogue that we are going to have on 6th of November.
I see. Well, Turkey and Qatar have helped with mediating efforts between the two nations. It's something we are seeing more and more of between countries, especially within this region. Why is peace between these two countries in their best interest to be mediators of?
Again, I will be referring back to the human cost of the war. So when as far as Afghanistan is concerned, Afghan Taliban, they had been using these proxies, and in the past, the TTP, when crackdown was carried out against them by Pakistan security officials, Pakistan security officials, they recovered Indian medicine from their hideouts. They recovered Indian currency from these hideouts and the weapon which was manufactured in India. So the point is that if this particular fight continues, then we will see the further interference of India into this particular conflict. And now the point is that why, if we talk about this particular mediation, why it is compulsory or why it is significant for the mediators, they want to avoid the use of proxies in this particular war. If you talk about Turkey, Turkey had been fighting against KPP. And they were receiving assistance from outside elements. So Turkey is aware of the cost of human cost of war, the economic cost of war. So that is the whole interest. And moreover, if you talk about the trade between these two countries, that has been suspended. So they won't avoid the human cost, and they also want to avoid the economic cost of the war.
And do you think, is it likely that the fragile ceasefire will last? Because it has been broken in the past, but do you think both sides will keep to this ceasefire?
As far as Pakistan is concerned, we are on with Afghanistan, and we have not, Pakistani security forces, they have not violated the ceasefire. But the point is that this, and you have also used the word fragile. Of course, this is a fragile, ceasefire agreement because Taliban in Afghanistan, they are having fluid identity. For example, if you go back in after post 9/11, they were the freedom fighters, or they were running the resistance movement. Later on, they became negotiators. They were having negotiations with the United States of America, and then after U.S. withdrawal, they became the sole runner of Afghanistan, and then moreover, they're cleric, but at the moment, again, they're in double role. They're a negotiator on one hand, representing Afghanistan and Turkey, and on the other hand, they are also, they're sponsoring proxies against Pakistan. So the point is that Afghan Taliban, they're not honoring their commitment, which they made with the United States of America in written, that they will not allow the Afghan soil to be used against any state in the region or beyond region. But they are not honoring their particular agreement, and moreover, they are not ready to give their thing, to confirm that Afghan soil will not be used against Pakistan. So that's the reason that's the reason we can say that this particular agreement, with, or this is a fragile ceasefire agreement.
I see. Now, we know that there is a deeper history between the two nations, especially when it comes to the militant groups connected to Pakistan, Taliban, which you kind of touched upon previously before. But just to let our audience know, why is this such a source of contention between the two neighboring countries?
Okay, if you talk about the main problem between Pakistan and Afghanistan, that is the Durand Line, which was established in 1993. And the line was, established so that Afghanistan can become a buffer zone between a British Empire and the Russian Empire, but which neither Taliban nor the successive government in Afghanistan have ever accepted. And it is interesting. It would be interesting for your viewers that Afghanistan was the only country in 1948 who refused to accept Pakistan as a member of the United Nations. So the problem is acceptance of Durand Line, and this Durand Line is not a small stretch. Rather, it's a 2,600 kilometer long line, and they claim that it does not exist. So Afghanistan or Afghan government, it want to extend that line, or they want to annex the whole of KPK province to Pakistan, and the distance from a Durand Line to the Punjab province in Pakistan, that stretches from 150 kilometers to 200 and 300 kilometers. So they want Pakistan to surrender that particular line. And because of this particular reason, these Afghan Taliban, which I stated earlier that they are having fluid identity, they had kept on changing their role. And now they are using TTP or Tehrik-e-Taliban of Pakistan, which is a designated terrorist group by the United Nations and United States of America. So the point is that despite the fact that I also mentioned this point earlier, that we had been providing refuge to Afghan nationals for more than 4 decades, or from 1981 till date. But they're still not ready to honor whatever they have been provided by Pakistan, and they have become a Frankenstein. The Afghan regimes, whether it's Taliban regime or prior to that, they have become bloodthirsty monsters, and they want to keep on inflicting damage to Pakistan, and they want to keep bleeding Pakistan. So the point is that this particular Durand Line, that is the main issue between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Okay, and I'm just going to just interject there. I know you describe them as bloodthirsty. Obviously, we don't have a Taliban or Afghanistan representative, so we cannot state those claims. Obviously, they are your own. But that's very interesting as to how you explained, and you've been able to inform us. So thank you so much for your contribution, Mr. Ahmed.